Have you ever felt that nagging pull, that constant pressure to look outward, to seek approval, to fit into molds that just don't feel like your own? Carl Jung, the brilliant mind behind so much of what we understand about ourselves, taught us that the path to emotional healing truly begins when we find the courage to prioritize ourselves. In a world that endlessly pushes us to conform, how often do we pause and ask, what do I truly want? What do I need to feel fulfilled? The profound truth is, the answers to these questions aren't found in someone else's opinion or external validation. They reside in a deep, unwavering connection with your own essence. Prioritizing yourself isn't selfish, it's the exact opposite. It means you're finally paying attention to the most important person in your life, you. Jung warned us that many of our emotional wounds stem from a constant disconnection from our true selves. We spend years molding ourselves to meet the expectations of society, family, partners, until we forget who we truly are. But here's the key. Everything we suppress, everything we deny about ourselves, doesn't just disappear. It transforms into a shadow, an unacknowledged part of us that, sooner or later, finds a way to show up in our lives. Perhaps you've noticed this in recurring relationship patterns, in self-sabotage, or a persistent feeling of dissatisfaction. We wonder why life isn't changing, why we're stuck in the same conflicts, without realizing the answer isn't out there, but within us. Jung teaches us that healing begins when we stop searching externally and dare to explore our inner world. Think of your life as a mirror reflecting your inner state. If you constantly surround yourself with people who don't value you, if you feel your energy drained in toxic relationships or unfulfilling situations, that's no accident. It's your unconscious mind showing you that something within needs attention. The question is, are you ready to listen? Most people avoid this process because facing yourself isn't easy. It means looking at our wounds and insecurities and accepting that we often allow our own pain to persist. But that's exactly where true transformation begins. When you prioritize yourself, you realize you can't heal as long as you're surrounded by what hurts you. Emotional healing doesn't happen in toxic environments. It doesn't happen if you keep doing things the way you've always done them. Jung spoke of the profound importance of individuation, a process where we detach from external influences to discover our own unique identity. This doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world. It means stopping the world from dictating who you are. How often have you felt your happiness hinged on the approval of others? How often have you held back from doing what you truly wanted out of fear of rejection? When you begin to put yourself first, something shifts inside you. You stop settling for emotional crumbs. You stop expecting others to fill voids within you that only you can heal. You realize you don't have to force yourself into a predefined mold, because what you truly need is a connection to yourself. And when that happens, healing flows without obstruction. Relationships that once drained your energy naturally fade. Situations that once terrified you lose their power. Not because the world has changed, but because you have changed. You've stopped looking externally for what was always within you, and this, right here, is where true freedom is born. The freedom that comes when you realize your well-being depends on no one but yourself. But this process doesn't happen overnight. It requires courage. It requires patience. It means saying no, setting boundaries, and, above all, listening to yourself. How often have you ignored your intuition, afraid to disappoint others? How often have you sacrificed your inner peace to please someone else? Jung tells us the price of ignoring yourself is simply too high. We pay with anxiety, dissatisfaction, and a life that doesn't feel like our own. When you choose to prioritize yourself, you'll notice something remarkable. The world suddenly doesn't seem so chaotic. Relationships aren't a constant struggle. Why? Because you've stopped fighting against yourself. Emotional healing isn't a destination you reach. It's a path you walk day by day. It's the conscious decision to choose yourself repeatedly, without guilt, without fear. And when you finally do this, everything changes, not because the world transforms, but because you now see it through different eyes. The peace you sought outside was always within you. You just had to remember you deserve more. You deserve a life where you don't need permission to be yourself. This is just the beginning. The true transformation begins when you take that first step, when you decide to leave behind what no longer aligns with you and allow yourself to discover who you truly are. It's not easy, but it's the only path to an authentic and fulfilling life. And the question is, are you ready to walk that path? As you begin to prioritize yourself, you'll gain clarity on dynamics that previously went unnoticed. Suddenly, you realize certain relationships only worked because you were putting in all the effort, that there were situations where you gave more than you received, and that you often endured the unbearable simply out of fear of being alone. But when you choose yourself, something within you shatters, an internal breaking, a fissure through which the light of consciousness can finally penetrate. Jung taught us that everything we suppress finds its expression in our lives in some way. If we don't listen to our needs, we project them onto others. If we don't recognize our own worth, we attract people who confirm that feeling. And if we avoid confronting our wounds, the world will keep mirroring them back to us until we are ready to look. This is the process many avoid because it's uncomfortable. It means accepting that what we called love was often just attachment, that what we considered friendship might have been a connection of convenience, and that many of our decisions were made out of fear, the fear of not being good enough. But here's the key. When you prioritize yourself, you stop settling for less. You stop negotiating your inner peace. You stop tolerating the unbearable. And then something happens that frightens many people. You start losing people. Not because you've changed fundamentally, but because you no longer tolerate what you once accepted. People who once seemed important drift away, some even without explanation. What initially feels like a loss soon transforms into liberation, because with every door that closes, space opens for something genuine. This process is necessary but not easy. The unconscious resists change because it craves the security of the familiar. Even if the past was painful, it's known, and the known offers a deceptive sense of control. That's why many people prefer to stay in situations that hurt them, in relationships that drain them, because the fear of the unknown seems greater than the suffering they already know. But true change happens precisely here, when you let go. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting overnight or pretending you don't care. It means accepting that you can't force anyone to stay, that you can't make anyone value you if they don't want to, and that the only person responsible for your well-being is yourself. At this point, the world divides into two types of people. Some continue to search externally for something they can only find within themselves. Others choose to face themselves and begin their own journey of healing. Jung tells us, "The path to wholeness is not easy, but it is the only one truly worth taking." It is the path of authenticity, the path where you allow yourself to be truly you, without excuses, without fear. When you decide to put yourself first, you realize something powerful. The quality of your relationships changes. People who are only in your life for their own benefit recede, and in their place come those who genuinely appreciate your presence. Relationships where reciprocity reigns, where affection isn't measured by sacrifice, but by mutual support. Because when you value yourself, you stop settling for less than you deserve. The problem is, most people never reach this point because letting go is painful. Not just because of the loss itself, but because it forces us to confront the part of us that allowed certain patterns for so long. It's easier to blame others, to say the problem lies externally. But Jung reminds us, everything we experience is a mirror of our inner state, and until we do the work to heal internally, we will keep reliving the same patterns. This is where the concept of the shadow comes into play. Jung said that we all carry parts within us that we don't want to acknowledge. Fears, insecurities, hidden desires, emotions we suppress because we've been taught they're unacceptable. But denying our shadow doesn't make it disappear. On the contrary, the more we ignore it, the more power it gains over us. The shadow doesn't vanish just because you avoid it. It hides in the relationships you enter, in the conflicts you experience, in the emotions you can't control. When you prioritize yourself, you begin to consciously perceive your shadow. You start to recognize your own patterns, the ways you self-sabotage, the moments you say yes when you really mean no. And in that moment, you have two choices: continue living in unconsciousness or take control of your life. Many people stop at this point because facing the shadow is uncomfortable. It means acknowledging that we allowed situations that hurt us, that we gave too much where we weren't valued, that we settled for less than we deserved. But here's the truth. The pain that comes with recognizing reality is temporary. The pain of living in denial can last a lifetime. The path to emotional healing begins when you are ready to look at yourself honestly, not with judgment, but with compassion. Jung said that we cannot heal what we do not recognize. We cannot change what we are unwilling to accept. But the moment you stop hiding, without masks, without excuses, something shifts within you. This is precisely where true healing begins, when you stop looking for blame and start embracing your own power, when you realize that life doesn't just happen to you, but that it is shaped by every one of your choices. When you understand that you don't need external validation to live an authentic life. From this point forward, change becomes inevitable. You begin to attract people and situations that align with your new state of consciousness. You stop striving to fit in somewhere you never belonged. The fear of the future dissolves because you trust your ability to shape your life from your inner truth. But the most beautiful thing of all is the peace that arises when you finally choose yourself. This feeling of freedom that can only be experienced when you are no longer dependent on something external to feel complete. This certainty that everything you need is already within you. The question is, are you ready to go through this process? Are you ready to let go of what weighs you down and open yourself to the possibility of something better? It won't be easy, but I assure you, it will be worth it. Because when you prioritize yourself, emotional healing flows without obstacles, and the world stops being a hostile place. It becomes a mirror of your inner well-being. When you start putting yourself first, something unavoidable happens. You change. And when you change, the people around you react. Some celebrate it, others question it, and some will even try to make you feel guilty for not being the person they once knew. This is one of the hardest moments in the whole process, because you'll realize that not everyone is ready to accept your transformation. This is precisely where many retreat, fall back into old patterns, return to unfulfilling relationships, accept conditions that diminish them, all out of fear of losing the familiar. But here's the truth. If you have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's life, that space was never meant for you. Jung taught us that individuation, the process of truly becoming the person you are meant to be, is not a path everyone will understand. But that doesn't matter. What matters is whether you are willing to keep going, even if it means walking alone for a while. The fear of being alone is one of the biggest traps in personal growth. We've been taught that being alone means being incomplete, rejected, or a failure. But the reality is, loneliness isn't the problem. The real problem is not being able to be with yourself. Jung said that the journey to wholeness requires a phase of deep introspection, a moment where we stop seeking externally what can only be found within. And when we learn to be comfortable in our own company, we stop accepting just anything to escape the discomfort of silence. At this point, many experience what Jung called the dark night of the soul. It's a transitional phase where everything old crumbles, but the new hasn't yet arrived. It's an emptiness, a feeling of uncertainty where everything that once seemed secure begins to waver. And this is exactly where most people give up, because the mind wants immediate answers, seeks certainties, wants to cling to something. But true growth doesn't work that way. True transformation happens when you allow yourself to dwell in that emptiness, without trying to fill it with the familiar. When you resist the temptation to return to the known just because it's comfortable. When, instead of seeking distraction, you choose to face what you truly feel. In this moment, many realize that a large part of their identity was built around others, that their worth depended on being needed, accepted, or acknowledged. And when all these external expectations fall away, a central question arises. Who am I when no one is looking? For Jung, the answer lies in integrating our entire being. Not just the side we show the world, but also our shadows, our wounds, our deepest truths. When you stop running from yourself, when you find the courage to honestly look at your life, something changes. The need to please disappears. The urge to conform dissolves. And for the first time, you feel free. In this moment, the world will test you. Situations from the past will return to see if you've truly learned the lesson. Relationships you thought you'd overcome resurface. People who once manipulated you will try again, and that's when you'll know if you've truly changed. Not because the world appears different, but because you now react to it differently. You no longer need to explain yourself. You no longer feel the need to convince anyone of your worth. You understand that not every connection is meant to last forever, and that the loss of some people isn't a tragedy, but an act of self-respect. The energy you once spent trying to please others, you now invest in yourself. And that, however unfamiliar it may seem at first, is the greatest act of self-love you can give yourself. When you prioritize yourself, you recognize patterns you previously overlooked. You understand that life isn't a random sequence of events, but a mirror of your consciousness. Everything you see externally reflects what you carry within. Jung speaks of the principle of projection. What bothers us about others, what we admire or reject, is often an expression of parts within ourselves that we haven't yet recognized. If you constantly experience relationships where you feel undervalued, if you repeatedly overexert yourself, then ask yourself, what part of me still believes I'm not enough? Because the answer lies not externally, but in the relationship you have with yourself. When you do this inner work, something wonderful happens. Life stops being a struggle. The fear of the future dissolves because you trust your ability to master any situation from your inner truth. Relationships no longer become a source of conflict, but spaces for mutual growth. And, most importantly, you reclaim your power. This doesn't mean everything will be perfect, that you'll never feel fear or insecurity again. It means you now have the tools to no longer be controlled by these emotions, that you no longer act out of lack, but out of abundance, that you no longer desperately seek love, but realize love was within you all along. Jung taught us that life isn't about eliminating pain, but integrating it. True healing doesn't mean suppressing our wounds, but embracing them and giving them new meaning. When you allow yourself this, you stop living in the past, stop worrying about the future, and begin to live in the only reality that truly matters. The here and now. Here lies peace. Not in the absence of problems, but in the certainty that no matter what happens you have the strength to carry yourself. Not in the approval of others, but in the trust that at the end of the day, you are enough, just as you are. This is the gift of prioritizing yourself. You not only reclaim your energy, your time, and your inner peace, but something even more valuable, your authenticity. Because when you stop being what the world expects of you and start being who you truly are, emotional healing flows without barriers, and life finally becomes a mirror of your true inner world. When you finally decide to prioritize yourself, you realize that much of your suffering doesn't come from the outside world, but from the stories you've told yourself. Stories that made you believe you had to try harder to be loved, that you had to conform to be accepted, that you constantly had to prove your worth to be valued. But the moment you begin to question these beliefs, you see the truth with piercing clarity. It was never your responsibility to carry things that didn't belong to you. Jung taught us that the collective unconscious is full of inherited patterns and beliefs that we rarely question. Ideas about love, success, happiness, loyalty, sacrifice. All of this shapes us from childhood, and without realizing it, we repeat stories that aren't even our own. The awakening happens when you start to ask yourself, why do I believe what I believe? Why do I cling to dynamics that hurt me? Why do I tolerate the intolerable? These questions are uncomfortable because they force us to recognize that many of our choices weren't truly ours, but the result of what we were taught was normal. Perhaps you grew up watching your parents sacrifice for others without receiving anything in return, and now you believe that love means giving everything, even if it costs you your inner peace. Maybe you were told you're only worthwhile if you're productive, and now you feel guilty whenever you rest. Or you learned that being strong means enduring everything, and that's why it's hard for you to let go, even when something no longer makes sense. But here's the truth. You can unlearn everything that has limited you. You can choose new paths, new beliefs, new ways of seeing yourself and others. You are not condemned to repeat the same old stories forever. Jung tells us that destiny is not something fixed, but what we make of it with our consciousness. And when you expand your consciousness, your reality changes. When you prioritize yourself, you realize that love shouldn't be a struggle, that peace isn't an unattainable goal, that happiness shouldn't depend on external circumstances, and that you don't need to prove your worth. Your very existence is proof enough. And this is where true transformation begins. People who once held power over you lose their influence. Situations that once burdened you lose their significance, not because the world has changed, but because you've changed your relationship to the world. You stop wanting to be understood by those who never truly wanted to understand you. You stop trying to fit in where you were never welcome. You stop trying to save something that long ago belonged to the past. This is true freedom, not the deceptive freedom of being able to do anything without consequences, but the inner freedom of knowing that you need nothing outside of yourself to feel complete. The security of being able to be alone without feeling empty. The certainty that no matter what happens, you can always stay with yourself because you have learned to be with yourself. Jung said that individuation is the most important process of our existence, the path to wholeness, to inner integration. And although this path often comes with pain, loss, and loneliness, it is the only one that can lead us to a life of meaning. When you put yourself first, when you decide to let go of old versions of yourself that only existed to please others, life rewards you in unexpected ways. New people enter your life. Opportunities that seemed unattainable before begin to appear. And above all, you experience an inner peace you've never known, because you've stopped fighting against yourself. You no longer seek externally what was always within you. In this moment, many feel that they have finally woken up, that life is no longer about surviving or pleasing others, but about experiencing, creating, feeling, and living from a place of authenticity, not from fear. But the work doesn't end here. Consciousness is like a muscle. It needs constant training, because society, family, environment, they will all try to pull you back into old patterns. They will try to make you doubt yourself again, convince you that you are selfish just because you chose yourself. But the difference is, now you know the truth. You know that nothing is more precious than your inner peace, that nothing is more important than your well-being, and that at the end of the day, only those decisions that bring you closer to yourself truly matter. The world changes when you change. Relationships improve when you heal the relationship with yourself. Opportunities come when you stop acting out of lack and start living from abundance. Jung tells us the unconscious responds to our deepest convictions, and if you truly believe that you deserve something better, then life ensures that you recognize it. And the question is, are you ready to truly see? Are you ready to let go of everything that no longer resonates with you and open yourself to the possibility of something completely new? It won't be easy, but I promise you, it will be worth it. Because when you finally prioritize yourself, emotional healing flows without obstacles, and your life becomes what it was always meant to be, a mirror of your own truth. When you start living from your authenticity, something remarkable happens. Things that once seemed confusing become clear. Relationships that previously exhausted you become unbearable. Situations you once simply accepted suddenly feel heavy. This is no coincidence. This is growth. It's a sign that you're evolving and that you can no longer ignore what your soul has been trying to tell you for a long time. Jung taught us that consciousness is not static. It expands the more we have the courage to look inward. And when that happens, the world cannot remain the same, because what you see externally is always just a mirror of what you carry within. If there is clarity within you, you will also see clarity outside. If there is chaos within you, you will find it outside. That's why, when you prioritize yourself, you begin to attract experiences that are in harmony with your new energy. You no longer have to force connections. You no longer have to beg for love. You no longer have to prove to anyone that you deserve respect. Everything begins to flow naturally, because you are no longer acting out of lack, but out of abundance. This shift doesn't happen overnight. There will be moments when you doubt, when the temptation to return to the old is strong, moments when loneliness feels heavy. But this is precisely where the true test lies. Will you betray yourself out of fear of being alone? Or will you uphold your authenticity until what truly belongs to you finds you? The unconscious constantly tests us, not because the universe wants to punish us, but because we need to prove to our own minds that we are ready for the next level. That's why, precisely when you start choosing yourself, people from the past reappear to pull you back into old patterns. Situations you once could barely handle may arise, not because you're regressing, but because you now have the chance to choose anew. When you pass this test, when you decide not to go back to what hurt you, something wonderful happens. Your energy completely transforms. You are no longer in fear mode. You are no longer trapped in the need for validation. You no longer wait for others to acknowledge your path. And when that happens, the world begins to respond in a new way. Opportunities arise effortlessly. People enter your life with different intentions, with respect, admiration, authenticity. Everything that once seemed unattainable begins to materialize, not because the world has changed, but because you now believe you are worthy. Here, many feel that they have finally awakened, that all the pain of the past had a purpose, to bring you here. And although pain is never easy, when you look back, you will realize that every fall, every loss, every rejection was in reality a liberation in disguise. Jung reminds us that the unconscious forgets nothing, but it can heal. The wounds of the past don't disappear, but we can change our relationship to them. They are no longer chains that bind us, but reminders of how far we've come. And when you stop seeing your story as a chain of defeats and instead recognize it as a path of development, then everything changes. The problem is, most people never reach this point. They remain trapped in resentment, guilt, or nostalgia. They constantly look back, wishing things had gone differently. But true strength lies not in what could have been, but in what you can create from now on. When you prioritize yourself, you stop living in the past. You no longer have to justify anything. You no longer have to grieve anything. You simply accept that everything happened exactly as it was meant to, and that every experience prepared you to be the person you are today. And this is where life becomes fascinating. When you free yourself from the weight of the past, you realize that the future is entirely in your hands, that there is no fixed destiny you are at the mercy of, but infinite possibilities just waiting to be discovered. The only question that remains is, what will you do with this new freedom? Will you continue to repeat old stories, or will you have the courage to write something completely new? Most people choose the familiar, even if it makes them unhappy. But those who have the courage to choose themselves, who decide to live authentically without fear of the consequences, discover that life has much more to offer than they ever dared to dream. Because when you choose yourself, life also chooses you. When you value yourself, life responds with even more reasons to do so. When you let go of what doesn't serve you, what belongs to you finds its way to you. This is not magic, not luck. It is the natural law of energy. It is the mirror of your inner growth. It is the inevitable consequence of the most important decision you can ever make, the decision to be true to yourself. When you finally decide to prioritize yourself, your life takes a completely new direction. You no longer cling to what hurts you. You no longer try to convince others of your worth. You no longer live in constant uncertainty about whether you are enough, because deep down, you know that you are. You no longer search externally for what was always within you. But that doesn't mean the path will always be easy. There will be days when you doubt, when the wounds of the past want to speak louder than your new consciousness. Moments when you are tempted to return to the old simply because it is familiar. But the difference is, now you know the truth. You know that your inner peace is priceless, that your well-being is non-negotiable, that your worth does not depend on the opinions of others, and that changes everything. Jung taught us that the meaning of life is not superficial happiness, but fulfillment. And fulfillment is only achieved when you have the courage to truly be yourself, without masks, without fear, without waiting for validation. It's about living from your own authenticity, embracing your own light and your own shadow, accepting that every experience, however difficult, was a part of your development. When you reach this point, you no longer seek approval, but connection. You no longer want to fit in, but to belong in a place where you can be completely yourself. And that's where true magic happens. Because when you live from your truth, you attract people and opportunities that are truly in alignment with you. This message doesn't end here. If these words resonated with you, if you felt they spoke directly to your soul, then it's a sign that this knowledge isn't just for you. There are many people out there who need to hear this too, who are trapped in painful patterns, who are searching externally for what they can only find within themselves. Now is the time to share this message with the world. If you've ever felt alone in this process, remember, thousands of people are walking the same path right now, and every word you share can be the light that someone else needs to awaken. Leave a comment below and tell me what part of this message touched you most deeply. What are you ready to change? What relationships or habits are you ready to let go of? Or simply share how you feel after hearing these words. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so this message reaches even more people. Every time you interact with this content, you not only help spread it further, you also become part of a movement for consciousness and inner transformation. Because the world needs more people living from their authenticity. People who have the courage to be themselves, without fear, who choose peace over chaos, who decide without guilt to prioritize themselves. If this message found you, it's because you are ready to take the next step. Share this content, comment, subscribe, and always remember, when you choose yourself, emotional healing flows without obstacles, and your life becomes a mirror of your own truth. We'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep choosing yourself day after day.